Okay, so do a short reflection on the Dhamma. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dhammāṃ saranang gacchāmi, Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. Dutiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Dhammāṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. Tatiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Dhammāṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. Let me just find my... So nice to see everybody here today. And we have considerably nicer weather. A lot of sunshine. You know, we've had like 3 or 4, I think, blizzards, you know, in like a week, you know. Actually, I was talking to somebody, and they have a kind of kid, and I was saying, I remember when I was a kid, and there was one year that it snowed a lot, and I think school got closed like 3 or 4 days that year. But this year it's been like 10 days. So this is kind of apparently one of the best years to be a kid in the wintertime. Kind of a rare occurrence of so many blizzards. So, you know, I was kind of hoping Canada would become a tropical country, you know, with the with temperatures rising. But so far it's still holding on to our status as a cold country. And so these kind of blizzards are a rare kind of occasion. You know, all these things come together. Don't know when we're going to have these unusual amounts of snow, unusual amounts of blizzards. And interestingly enough, today is actually what they call Māgha Pūja. It's kind of a very special holiday in the Buddhist calendar. And this holiday kind of marks a time in the early portion of the Buddha's teaching career where he had 1,250 of his disciples just gather without any previous kind of like messages being sent or anything. They just all came together on this full moon day of this month, and the Buddha recited what they called the Ovada Pātimokkha Gathā. And this is something that monks recite, I think, after every recitation of the monastic rules. So Ovada basically means like a talk, like a short exhortation is the translation they often use in English. And Pātimokkha is the monk's rules, and Gathā is like a gatha, like a kind of a short kind of stanza that they give. And so I'm actually really bad at memorizing gathas, so... But, you know, this is every Māgha Pūja day you usually talk about Māgha Pūja. And one of the interesting things about this Ovada Pātimokkha Gathā is it's before the monk's rules were actually laid down. So monks, the lifestyle of a monk, actually what defines a monk is the monastic rules. Without the monastic rules, there would be no difference between monks and lay people. Just be people, right? Kind of... So the monastic rules actually got laid down very, very slowly, bit by bit. Actually, what happened was one of the Buddha's chief disciples, he went to the Buddha and he said, you know, there's been these previous Buddhas. Kind of our Buddha is not the only one. There's been others. And he said, what was it that made the dispensations of these Buddhas last a long time? And our Buddha, he said to Venerable Sariputta, who was his chief disciple, he said, well, you know, there's 2 things. One of them is that those Buddhas they gave, that where their dispensation lasted a long time, they gave a lot of talks, like a lot of teachings, a lot of different suttas. That's one. And the other one was they laid down a disciplinary code for monks, kind of this code that you have to live by. And he said, it's like, you know, you have a bunch of flowers and you put them on a rock, and if, excuse me, if there's a lot of wind, the wind will just kind of blow those flowers off the rock, and kind of just blow them in every direction. But if you tie those flowers together with a string, then they stay there, you know, kind of more sturdily. So in the same way, these kind of monastic rules that kind of bind the monastic lifestyle together. They also bind monks and laity together. They make monks basically almost completely dependent on lay people. You can't live as a monk without lay people, so you can never become a hermit. And so in this way, there's always a kind of class of specialists in the Buddhist religion. And the monks' rules basically force you to devote yourself almost entirely to meditation. You can't, meditation and teaching. You can't do almost anything else. You can walk here and there. You can take buses and this kind of thing, but almost everything you're kind of restricted from. It's very kind of all-encompassing monastic code of behavior. And this kind of Pātimokkha Gathā, the interesting thing, this was laid down before this monastic code. So actually the way that the monastic code came about, Venerable Sariputta said, okay, good, Blessed One, please lay down a monastic code so that the religion will last a long time. And he said, wait, I'll know the right time for that. And he said, right now, all the monks around are at the very least what they call stream enters. So they're people who are guaranteed to attain Nibbāna in 7 lifetimes. He says, it's not until defilements arise in the Sangha that I lay down a monastic code. And some of his reasons are interesting for when these defilements arise. One is that the Sangha, I think, gets really big. Sangha becomes great in numbers. Another one is that there's a lot of wealth in the Sangha. When there's a lot of wealth, then these kind of defilements arise. Another one is there's a lot of learning in the Sangha. A lot of monks kind of know. It's interesting because, one of the things right there is, when the Buddhists lay down a lot of suttas, but when there's a lot of learning in the Sangha, that's when these kind of defilements arise. Basically when the Sangha becomes very prestigious, a lot of people want to join it, and just by joining it, you get prestige. That's when these defilements arise. And he says, when that happens, these things arise, then each time one of them arises, a Buddha lays down a rule to counter it. So in other words, it's not like, in the Western society, we have these kind of 2 kinds of law codes, different kinds of law codes. One is, they call the kind of Justinian law code, as far as I remember it. I think they kind of still do that in France. I'm not sure. Maybe if there's any lawyers here, they'll correct me. But basically what they do is they start from a first principle, something like that. This is the principle of the law, and they write the law down. And the way that the law is written is the way that it's followed. And there's a kind of another type of law that's more kind of case-oriented. In other words, there's written statutes for the laws, but then these laws get interpreted by judges. In each different case, the way that the judge judges the case determines how future cases of the same sort are going to be judged. So in the Buddhist teaching, when he laid down a rule, it was actually each time in response to an incident. So he didn't just say, okay, I'm going to lay down a full-on set of laws right now for everybody. Each rule that a monk has is because some monk did something really, really bad. Sometimes some of the things, if you ever read the monastic rules, the things that the monks get up to, it's really, it's like, you just have no, people, people think, okay, well, this or that bad thing happened. The worst things that could possibly happen happened in the time of the Buddha. Like they were up to everything. You're kind of, almost, anyways, I can't even get into it because there's just so much. Every rule has a precedent where some monk did something really, really terrible. This is just, something really outlandishly bad often. So he laid down each of these rules step by step. And because of this, we have a kind of monastic code that when people kind of question us, you can say, okay, well, look, that rule might seem a little strange, but this is why it happened, And the interesting thing is when these rules get removed, when people start to think, monastic rules are not important, the same things happen again. A lot of that happened with Buddhism when it first came to the West in the 60s. Kind of a lot of the monastic rules got kind of, okay, well, we don't need these rules. And interestingly enough, when you read the history of some of the things that happened in these communities, and then you read the Vinaya, you're like, okay, this is the same thing that happened 2,500 years ago. In other words, there are these kind of principles behind human defilements that just keep popping up. These one of the ways that one monk described the Vinaya when you read it is very interesting. Like when you watch these cartoons when you're a kid, and the same evil villain just keeps coming back. He's just always he's up to the same hijinks. Like like you see him, he's got the same costume on. He's going to do something bad, and it's related to the same type of hijink. And this is the kind of same thing that happens in the Vinaya. The same monks, you see them, they come up like the monk who keeps getting offenses for robes. He's the one who instigates like a lot of rules for robes. It's the same monk. Just keeps popping up. Some monks instigate a lot of rules for kind of like, women. Other ones, like money, different things like that. But the interesting thing about this is that the defilements and the principles behind them are the same, kind of similar. 2,500 years ago, we think culture was so radically different, things were so radically different that, it must have been so completely different time that some of these things don't apply. But actually, many of these kind of things, they're the same. When we take away the rules, people do these things again. Excuse me. And this is what this Pātimokkha Ovada, is kind of about. This Pātimokkha Ovada basically goes through when these 1,250 Arahants gathered together. What he taught about was he taught about what the teachings of all Buddhas were. In other words, some of these Buddhas, they appear at these radically different times. So, oftentimes nowadays we will think of our time in history as the kind of apex of human civilization, the top of what humans are able to achieve. But in the Buddhist thinking, there's actually much more. There's times when we might call beings who have similar constitutions to us, they achieve immense success in their mastery of the material world, and they achieve lifespans that last a really long time, sometimes like 60,000 years or 80,000 years or anything like that. And, discussing this, there's of course science to discuss and all that kind of thing, but this is the kind of concept that's present in Buddhist thinking, that there's all these various times when people, you basically couldn't even call them people, kind of just different beings, And some of them achieve this spectacular success to the point where some suttas say, at the time of this Buddha, there was only 3 difficulties. There was kind of, the need to go to the bathroom, urinate, the need to defecate, and I can't remember what the third one was. I think it was like hunger. So that's all they had. Didn't have any other difficulties. They'd so mastered their physical environment, and they lived for 80,000 years, So you can imagine in a time like this, what the Buddhists teach about gets a little bit different. So actually, these days, the kind of place where I ordained, the tradition where I was lucky to ordain in, one of the things that they emphasize a lot is, when you teach the Dhamma to people, you don't just kind of repeat, what you've heard. You shouldn't prepare your talks, which of course you can't, it's not like it's terrible to prepare, but there is a kind of, there's an ethos behind that, which is that times change, and although there's principles behind the Dhamma, they have to be expressed in a language that's suitable for the people at hand. They have to be expressed in metaphors that are suitable for the people at hand. And yet, although there's these vast different changes between one Buddha and the next, between one age and the next, between one century and the next, nevertheless, the interesting thing is that there's always these principles that are taught by all Buddhas. That's kind of what this Ovada Pātimokkha Gathā was about, is the teachings of all Buddhas. And this was the precursor to the monastic rules, the principles which are still relevant today. So one of these principles is interesting. The first one is that, and I know a few of the lines. I'm sure there's maybe people here know all of them, But the first one is Kanti Paramam Tapotitikka, which means, Kanti means patience, and Paramam means the highest. Tapo is this kind of idea that they had in ancient India. When you do an austerity, you burn. It's kind of like they would fast, and they got this idea it would generate this kind of heat energy. And when this heat energy built up, you got psychic powers. But there's this idea what they call tapas. It means burning. Tapo means burn. Kanti paramang tapo titika, Nibbāna paramang vadanti Buddha. Nibbāna paramang vadanti Buddha means this is all the Buddhists say Nibbāna is supreme. Kanti paramang tapo titika means patience, or patient endurance is the highest austerity. Kanti paramang tapo titika, the highest austerity. So basically this first line here, I'll go through some of the kind of lines, right after saying, what I said, but this Kanti paramang tapo titika, this is a very kind of interesting one, because oftentimes, especially in the modern day, we don't think of getting rid of our difficulties through patience. The teaching often that we get is, when one has a difficulty, to go and consume something to make that difficulty go away, and can consume some TV, can consume a relationship, consume a chocolate bar, whatever it is, we consume it, and during that act of consumption, our mind is gone. It's not on whatever our problem is. But actually, the Buddha's teaching in this first stanza, this is the teaching of all Buddhas, the principle behind getting rid of some of our problem, behind burning up all of our difficult emotional states, is this patience. This kind of patient endurance is the first thing he says, is the teaching of all Buddhas. In other words, whatever bad, difficult situation comes into a person's life, one of the first things that happens is, okay, this is going to take time to work out. Takes time to build up the alternative qualities that go against whatever one I have right now. If a person is suffering from a lot of anger, okay, I'm suffering from a lot of anger. It will take me time to to overcome this defilement. In other words, we don't sit down for our first time to meditate and experience all kinds of wonderful, amazing things. It's like I remember when I was a young kid, and there was this girl. She was very short when I was in grade 3, and I was also in grade 3. And this girl could do these kind of like backflips. She was able to kind of like go back like this. Do that thing where they go like that. I don't know what that's called. You guys, I'm sure if everybody watched the Olympics, you'd be able to see it. And I remember being so wanting that so much. Like, I want to be able to do that. She could do it backwards and like, And so, then you go to your first gymnastics class and you learn how to do a bridge. You kind of go up like this and you're like, okay, yeah, this is kind of hard. I kind of had enough of this, But the thing is, if you want to be able to do these kind of backflips, you have to spend a lot of time training in order to be able to do it. People see these Olympic athletes, people operating at the level of Olympic athletes who are doing amazing things in their gymnastics routine. Well, that didn't happen overnight. That happened over a very long and dedicated course of training. A very long and dedicated course of training. These people are able to flip their bodies in these kind of amazing ways. And it's the same thing with overcoming difficult emotional states, difficult mental states. There are these kind of techniques that one can learn in order to overcome these states, but to actually become skilled at them takes time. Takes this knowledge that this is something that's going to be taking time. We read the books about the great ajahns who sit down and they meditate and they're in a state of bliss for 8 hours. Okay, well, that's like a gymnast who just did a quadruple backflip. So if we want to be able to do a quadruple backflip, it's not saying we can't do that. But kanti paramang tapo titika. Patience is the highest practice for burning out unwholesome qualities. Whatever unwholesome quality we have, there's a possibility to eliminate that. But it requires this kind of patience, first of all. Patience in that it takes time, and also patience in that the fact that developing in wholesome qualities, developing in what we want, developing in happiness involves suffering. You want to learn to be an Olympic gymnast. First you start with this bridge, nothing much is happening, all your muscles are burning, and you have to learn to stretch. All these stretches are kind of painful and nothing's really happening at first. You're just stretching, just doing bridges. And yet this is where these kind of amazing tricks these people are able to do come from. They do them almost effortlessly once they've trained themselves enough. It's no problem for them to do splits in both directions, no problem for them to do a backflip. The kind of same thing with our minds. We want to tell our minds to be happy, and they don't obey. Kanti paramang tapo titika. Have to train in this quality, have to bring it up over and over again. It's a long project, but a project which has many benefits. And so the second line, that all Buddhas teach is Nibbāna paramang vadanti Buddha. So that means that Nibbāna is the Buddhist goal. Paramang means highest, Vadanti means they say, and Buddha means all Buddhas say Nibbāna is the highest thing. In other words, there's many things that people strive for in their life. One of these stories that I often tell, was when I was in grade 3. I think many people who've been to the meditation class have heard this story before. But when I was in grade 3, the teacher asked us, what is it that you think the purpose of your life is for? And I remember thinking, the purpose of life is to be happy. And so I put my hand up and said that, and the teacher was like, no, that's not the purpose of life. Okay, but I was kind of convinced, this is the purpose of life. There's no other purpose to my life. Like, what am I doing everything for if it's not to be happy? Like, what's the point of having all these various things? And because of this, this idea that whatever people want is to be happy, people have all kinds of ideas about what it is that's going to make them happy. And some people, when they encounter difficulty, it's like, okay, well, if I just had this, they encounter difficulty with their children. If I just had a child who would behave, I would be happy, Their child is having a difficult time in their life. If my child was having a good time, I would be happy. For them, this is the highest. This is what's in their head as the highest thing. Not Nibbāna paramang, child happy. Paramang. Some people you often see, I remember when I was young, you see all these movies and they have this whole idea of like the one. And you kind of, just find the one. There's all these movies where like there's these two young teenagers and all these crazy things happen in their life, and then at the end of the movie they find the one. They get together, they run through a meadow or whatever it is, and the movie ends right there. You don't see them doing laundry or anything like that, or paying mortgages. They just run through the field. I was kind of being a little facetious there, but this idea that this is the highest thing. And if you find this partner, we get this partner in our life. You don't have this person. I just got to get this person in my life. And if I had them, I would be happy. Actually, there's a lot of that going around. You're so unhappy, don't have a partner. I mean, it's good if people have a happy marriage. This is a blessing. But there's this idea that having a partner is supreme. Nibbāna seems like something kind of terrible. If I just had a partner. I remember when I first joined the monastery, I went back to visit my mother, and I was telling the chief monk when I got back, I was like, yeah, there's my friend, and he's just getting. I don't think he was engaged then, but he had like a long-term girlfriend. And I was really young then. I was kind of 25 or something like that, and I was like, yeah, I think they're going to get married. And he's like, well, be careful. People go back and see that. Sometimes they start to think it's Nibbāna. Forget about Nibbāna. I want to get married. And then, of course, you talk to people, even people who've been married for 40 years. Of course, they're happy. They had a happy marriage. But you talk to them. I mean, it's not like their marriage was like some perfect joyride. From day one to the day 40, year 40, kind of a lot of work and effort goes into maintaining a long-term relationship like that. There's a lot of sacrifices. It's not something that's without conditions. And also, long-term marriages not always last a long time. Sometimes they fall apart. It's very sad. But we have this idea, marriage is paramang. This is the supreme thing. And then one of the other things that often gets thought of as supreme is to have this really good job. I remember actually was about to get on the bus the other day, and sometimes you overhear these conversations of people that kind of come behind you. It's freezing cold. You have to stand in the bus shelter. And it was this one fellow from Canada, one girl from India who just come here. And she obviously came here. She came here with the intention to get a good job, which is, not a bad thing. It's kind of a wise thing to have a good job. It's not bad to have a good job. But, sometimes this kind of focus on having a good job can be everything. So this word kept coming up in this conversation like success, like this guy had a government job and he quit his job, in the 90s or something like that. It kind of sounds like I heard a lot, right? They were right behind me. I tried to do some chanting, but I could still hear what they were saying. But this government job in the 90s, he was making like 25 or 29 bucks at the time, which is pretty good money. And she was like, well, you quit that job, and it sounded like he started spending half his time in India, I guess it sounded like it might have been on a spiritual quest. I don't know. The bus came, and I stopped listening, and they went their separate ways. But this word kept coming up in this conversation, like success. It's like, oh, well, you must have regretted that. You quit your job. Of course, maybe that was or was not a wise move. You have a mortgage to pay. She kept saying, I'm here, I want to be successful. And they were talking about people in India. She was talking about success, success and failure, success, success, success. And what became obvious was that success meant money. If you had money, that was success. If you didn't have money, that was failure. There's a very clear dividing line in this kind of thinking. At least, that might not have been what she was thinking, but that was what I perceived, at least, coming across. And this kind of idea is have money is successful. This kind of idea often rests along assumptions of a whole lot of other things that are static. So for that girl, I could tell, she had a happy marriage. You have a happy marriage, all these things are going well. Your family is very supportive. There's a lot of kind of good things in your life. A job seems like the most important thing. But, in the West, this is a very, very wealthy country right here. Canada is very wealthy. The United States is very, very wealthy. Britain is very wealthy. Australia is very wealthy. People have very good jobs. Actually, you can go to school now almost any time in your life, and if you get a 4-year degree in accounting or finance, you're almost guaranteed a job, and that job will pay very well. You make money. It's not impossible to do here. But one of the ironies of this, one of the things that's unexpected, is that this is one of the wealthiest times. I have to say this as well. And yet it's also a time when sadness is on the rise. There's epidemic levels in Western society. So I remember when I first came back here from the monastery, I was away from Toronto area for about 7 years, and came back, and there was all these phones at the GO train, and phones in the subways, and a lot of posters saying, like, if you want to commit suicide, pick up the phone. And, not a laughing matter. People are very sad, very unhappy with their lives. And I was actually on, the first year I came here, I think I was on 4 trains where people jumped in front of them. And one train I was on, I actually heard 2 TTC drivers come in afterwards, and they were talking about the driver, and the guy jumped right in front of the train. The driver saw him, and he had to take time off work. It was like almost immediately after. And my friend, don't know if I should be spilling the secrets of the TTC, but my friend, his brother works for the TTC, and I told him this when I came back. I was like, I don't remember seeing this. This is a lot of phones here. And he's like, the amazing thing is that people don't know how often that happens. His brother works for the TTC. This is like once a week. It's like a lot that happens. He said it takes they get rid of it all in like 10 minutes. So there's a phrase that they use, which I won't repeat on the internet. Whenever they repeat that phrase, it means somebody has committed suicide in front of a TTC train. And this is in spite of having magnificent wealth. It's a magnificently wealthy country. It's kind of no denying that, the wealth and power of the modern Western world. It's incredibly wealthy, incredibly powerful, and that wealth there's portions available for everybody who wants to go to school. And yet, this kind of success does not bring happiness. So in other words, having this idea, this job is supreme, and kind of wealth paramang, is not what the Buddha say. Wealth is the highest thing. This is another kind of thing that can come in. If I just had this kind of wealth, I would be happy. If I just had this kind of wealth, it would be good. So the interesting thing is that the teaching of all the Buddhas, regardless of what age it is, regardless of what the structures of society are at that time, whether it's 2,500 years ago in India, whether it's today, whether it's like Star Trek in like 1,000 years where people are like beaming up and they have food replicators, there's always going to be something that people want. Whatever they want, they think it's supreme. If I could just get it, I'd be happy. If I could just grab that, I'd be happy. But it's like a mirage. You can kind of remember, oftentimes in the summer, down where my grandfather lives, it gets very hot, kind of Windsor area, and it's flat. Kind of all this like black tarmac. And if you look ahead, the road kind of shimmers. Kind of looks like there's water on the road. And if you were thirsty, you would run towards that spot. But every time you get to the spot, there's no water. You're gonna, it's gone. It's still the same distance away. You're gonna have to keep running down the road, to get to that. And when you get there, it's gone. It's just more road. In other words, it's a mirage. It's an illusion. And this is the kind of same thing with all these various things that people tend to think will make them happy. They run to them and they get them. And when they get them, the minute they get them, they want something else, something further down the road. Which is why all the Buddhas say that Nibbāna is supreme. Nibbāna is actually the end of wanting anything. It's the end. It's the destruction of desire. So this is the teaching of all the Buddhas. And the third one is, I can't remember the actual Pali verse right now, but it's basically about harmless. It says, whoever kind of harms another person can't be called a monk. And so I was talking to somebody today, actually. It was kind of interesting. And they were saying about somebody who's gone on a lot of retreats that they know. Kind of this person who's done a lot of retreats. And they kind of have these intensive retreats. And you kind of sometimes meet people who come off these intensive retreats, and they have very strong egos. about their intensive retreat. They get off the retreat, and not everybody, of course, but sometimes can happen that people go on a 10-day retreat. And if you've ever been on a retreat, it can sometimes end up being like this competitive atmosphere. You're kind of there with like all these people. You're all sitting down. It's like, okay, I don't want to move as much as my neighbor. If you move and that guy doesn't move, you feel kind of bad. It gets this kind of way. Especially depending on how the retreat is structured and its intentions. And so this person that they were telling me about had been on many of these retreats. I think she said like 30 retreats, which adds up to a lot. Like that must be wrong. Like, it was a lot though. 30 retreats is like, that's 300 days. That's almost a year. Maybe it was 30. And said that even times this person had done 30-day retreats in this particular tradition. But then when they were going on, they were very hurt by this person's behavior. This person had done a lot of kind of hurtful things to them. They had had this very kind of callous attitude. They'd been very successful in their career and had amassed a lot of wealth, amassed a lot of power. And oftentimes there is this aspect to meditation that's willful. We have to kanti paramang tapo titika. But there's also this aspect to meditation that's harmless. You kind of develop these genuine human qualities. So in other words, these kind of things can happen if we just have this idea about striving to be an achiever, or striving to be somebody who puts forth effort. We can become cruel people, become a cruel person on the path, a person with a very big ego about their achievements in meditation. People like this are like very difficult to hang around sometimes. You hang around them, and even if you're a monk, you meet some of these people sometimes. A Dhamma conversation with them is not really a conversation. You kind of like it's just like this onslaught of them telling you things what they think about the Dhamma, and you're like, why did you come to talk to me? Like, did you want to know something from me, or did you just want to tell me everything that you think? It's kind of this. You said that you have these kind of these cartoons where people like have a blow dryer, like you see somebody talking to somebody and their hair is just flying back, and you see the shout lines coming at your face. Some of these people who've been on like all these retreats, they can get like that, and kind of these very super conceited about their retreat experiences. And you start to wonder to yourself, what have you really achieved? If you've done monastic training, one of the first things you have to do is learn to like clean toilets. You have to learn to serve the senior monks. You have to learn to bow right off the bat. If you're 50 years old and you come to a monastery and there's somebody who's 20 and they ordain that day, that person is senior to you. You have to treat them with respect. You can't kind of contravene these provisions. And what all these things do is that basically our initial training, not just initial, the foundation for our training in making our minds happy is this foundation of goodness. And we learn to be good people. And we learn to be kind people. And we learn to be people who care about the people around us. We learn to be people who make the lives of the people around us good. In other words, wherever our sphere extends, whatever kind of people are around us, whatever things are around us, they should be the best things. Sometimes there's this opposite. The people who are closest to us get the most exploited. People who are kind of like the nicest people to us, when a nice person comes around, okay, that person gets exploited. If you have this kind of ruthless attitude, that can happen. The nicest people are the ones you respect least. The people that you respect the most are the ones who kind of like ignore you, who act like you're not that important. So actually I remember when I was, another one when I was young, this book called The Game came out. There's this book called The Game. And this book, The Game, was all about how to pick up women. And the ways that you pick up these kind of, these women were interesting. And they had kind of videos on it. And actually, some of the advice in this book I think was true, because I saw like in high school, when a woman was really pretty, often they would be successfully wooed with these techniques. And one of the interesting things was that these techniques were like not that friendly. One of the first things you were supposed to do when you met this, it was very manipulative techniques. You go up to one of these women who you first meet, you're supposed to touch them right away. And then within like the first 2 or 3 minutes of conversation, you're supposed to say something that's insulting but not super insulting. Like, oh yeah, that's a nice sweater. A lot of people wore that last year. And then so what tends to happen, the psychology behind this is that oh, this woman thinks, oh yeah, this guy, he doesn't like me that much. He must be important. Of course, that wouldn't work for all women, kind of. But what tended to notice, and of course this may not be true, was sometimes it would work. That's why they were able to write a book on it. And I'm sure that the same techniques would work for men as well. I'm sure there's similar ones as well. But it's basically this idea that if somebody thinks that I'm not important, if they don't really need me, that person must be really important. That must be what I really want to hang around. They don't need me, I need them. This is intriguing. You got the opposite. They didn't write a book called The Game on, being really nice and friendly. But, the people who are really nice to me, really friendly to me, okay, that's easy to get. I don't need it, People who are around me all the time, I can exploit, treat them really badly, The people who don't want me, I treat them really well. I'm really craving to them. The Buddhist teachings go in the opposite direction. And the people who have these wholesome qualities in our life, whoever approaches us with a sincere intention, those are the people we cultivate. The people who are kind of arrogant and turn our back to us, even if they're very rich or whatever they can offer us, they're going to make our life miserable. It's not going to be fun hanging around a person like that. You kind of have a really bad time hanging around them, chasing them around, doing whatever you can to be around them, and you're going to be miserable. So this is why there's also this teaching in meditation about harmlessness. In other words, whoever harms another can't be called a monk. This teaching of kindness, this teaching of generosity, this teaching of being a good person, this is common to all the Buddhas. Whoever it is, when a person learns to cultivate the path, whoever's closest to them, they should have the best life. Not the people who are closest to us have the worst time. We dump all our garbage on them. The people who are closest to us, we do our best to make their life good. Whatever that person needs, if we can provide it, we try. We try to help them, whatever way they can. And actually, you notice this as a monk, trying to teach meditation or trying to do meditation. The people who come and regardless, sometimes you get a sense, if they're sincere, like if they want to learn, if they approach with kindness, those are the people who you can help. Those are the people who will advance in their meditation. People come and they're like, yeah, I just sat for 5 hours. How many hours did you sit for? You get the feeling, okay, this person, I'm not going to be able to do anything for them, and they're actually going to be a thorn in my side. So sometimes people like that, they come, you speak to them very harshly. That's the only thing those people understand, because harsh speech. But this is the thing. Harmlessness is the kind of basis. It's kind of one of the first things. We don't have to look to anything very extravagant in our life to become happy. If we want to be happy, learn to be kind people, learn to be generous people, learn to make the people's lives who are closest to us the best. Learn to, whenever we meet somebody who's kind, that's a person to cultivate, They show us an act of kindness, we reciprocate, right away. It kind of builds up. And that makes these relationships with kind people strong. And that makes a person's life bright. If you're around kind people all the time, you're always hearing pleasant speech. When these people talk to you, they're always talking to you about nice, friendly things. If you're in a bad situation, they're the first ones to be there. If they're in a bad situation, you're there for them. In other words, your life starts to feel very bright. All your interactions with people start to feel very bright. And it's not because everybody in the world is bright, it's because you've cultivated a circle of nice people. Become a nice person. This is one of the first things that we learn when we meditate. And it goes on to other things. When we cultivate this kind of patient endurance, when we have this idea that we're striving for Nibbāna, when we cultivate kindness, then we can devote ourselves to the higher mind. They call the jhāna states. These states, this says, adichitte cha ayogo, cultivating these jhāna states. These are states of bliss that a person can cultivate inside. But they come about through a whole path development, not just through one isolated thing, through many good factors. So in other words, this is the interesting thing. One of the things that's possible to remember on Māgha Pūja, all the Buddhist teachings lead onwards. They all have principles that are common to all the Buddhas. It's not like this was something that was only relevant 2,500 years ago. What was relevant then in terms of our defilements, in terms of our happiness, is still relevant now. The principles are still practical now. Khanti, patient endurance, is still the highest practice for burning out defilements. Being harmless is still
one of the most important things for meditators to develop. Devotion to the higher mind, learning to cultivate these jhāna states, is still something that gives everybody an internal refuge. They don't have to be afraid when external things fall away. And Nibbāna is still the highest thing. It's the best thing that we can get, because this is the ending of all the craving that makes us run for these mirages. Go 15 feet down the road and the water's still 15 feet away. Go another 15 feet, it's still 15 feet away. And we learn to have everything we need right here. And when even that is gone, when everything is let go of, that's Nibbāna. It's the ending of all suffering and stress. And that's supreme. So say the Buddhas.